Hello and welcome to What Culture Horror with myself, Andrew Pollard, on the first episode of our shiny new series, Worst Horror Movies Ever. Yes, we're trying something different here at What Culture Horror. The plan here is to put a spotlight on those horror movies that are just bad. Like, bad. That said, this could also be a series that will allow a chance to reflect on those movies that are critically panned, but that some of us have a major soft spot for. Case in point, the movie in the spotlight today, Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Yes, I'm a big fan of this film, but I am fully aware that not many people are. In fact, I'm such a fan of this film. I dug out my Friday the 13th Part 8 Jason Takes Manhattan t-shirt and realized it is pretty much unwearable. So out that goes. But yeah, feel free to comment on this video with any suggestions of movies you would like to see featured in this series, should it carry on. Now, Friday the 13th Part 8 Jason Takes Manhattan, a 1989 film from writer-director Rob Hedden. It's often in the discussion of being the absolute worst in the Friday the 13th franchise. Me personally, I'd always rank Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, and Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood as being way worse than Jason Takes Manhattan, but I'm aware I'm in the minority there, and yes, there are lots of people that do like to dump on Part 8. So let's get to it and see why this film is actually rather bad, but also to defend it a little bit. So first and foremost, let's look at the film's title, because Jason Takes Manhattan. That conjures up images of Jason Voorhees causing all kinds of chaos and carnage in the Big Apple, with endless possibilities of the sights he could see, the places he could go, the people he could interact with. Instead, though, Jason Takes a Tiny Bit of Manhattan eventually would be a more fitting title. For the bulk of the film's 100 minutes, it's spent on a boat trip from Crystal Lake to New York City, which in itself throws up questions because, like, Crystal Lake is a lake, as in self-contained with no entry or exit points for other bodies of water. In fact, a quick Google search defines a lake as a large area of water surrounded by land. Surrounded by land. So, the fact that we've got a boat being able to somehow get from this lake, self-contained, all the way to New York City is quite the stretch. Added to that, you've got the very beginning of the film where Jason's chained to the bottom of Crystal Lake corpse is reanimated when a boat anchor conveniently snags a well-placed electrical cable, and Jason is essentially, well, he is reanimated, electrocuted back to life to embark on yet another rampage. In terms of your key characters, you've got Jensen Daggett as Renee, who's the, I guess, sheepish final girl who's afraid of the water, but she's got a dog with her, so that's cool. I think the dog, if I remember rightly, is called Ace. But she's also played by visions of Jason as a child, which makes for quite the visual. Then you've got Scott Reeves opposite her as Sean, who is kind of Renee's love interest, and also a reluctant sea captain in waiting, with his father being a sea captain and berated him for basically not being very good at following in the family footsteps. So yeah, and away from those, you've got Renee's uncle Charles, who's played by Peter March Richmond, who's a proper slimeball, just wants to check out certain students' biology project. And then there's this properly messed up flashback towards the end of the film where you've got Charles on Crystal Lake, Camp Crystal Lake. He's there on the lake with young Renee back in the day, and he kind of mocks her for not having learned to swim yet, tells her that Jason Voorhees is at the bottom of the lake, and then just pushes the poor kiddo in and, yeah, literally sink or swim. There's basically a Ralph tribute boat hand who points out how everybody's all doomed. Always happy to see one of those characters in here. Then there's a boat itself, which has a disco. The students shoot rifles at stuff. There's boxing, there's drugs, there's champagne. And like so many horrors of the time, you've got a bunch of supporting characters here who have various hobbies that are meant to lazily define their personalities. There's JJ, who's the badass guitar player, decked out in leather, playing a flying V, played by Saffron Henderson, who also replaced Gina Davis in the opening of The Fly 2. There you go, trivia for you. Of course, she does get bludgeoned by her own guitar when she goes off to test the acoustics of the ship's engine room. Then you've got Vince Craig's Dupree's. He's Julius, who's the prized boxer of the bunch. And of course, playing to type with these hobbies, he also comes unstuck by his own hobby of boxing, because of course he ends up having a fist fight with Jason Voorhees, with Julius basically punching himself out before asking Jason to take his best shot, which results in the amazing visual of Julius's head being punched off his shoulders and landing in the trash. You've got Wayne, who's the film school hopeful, who actually rocks a pretty sweet shirt throughout the film. I'll give him that one. And then you've got Charlene Martin as Tamara Mason, who's the mean girl with a cocaine problem because, babe, that's what happened in 1980 movies. And she's got an eager to please pal, Eva, who's played by Kelly who amongst other roles, will go on to play Lady Deathstrike in X-Men 2 and China White in Arrow. Ken Kirzinger's here as well as a diner cook. Now, Ken Kirzinger is a stuntman on this film and would later go on to play Jason Voorhees in Freddy vs. Jason, in a move that angered a lot of people because the whole thing of Freddy versus Jason was going to be Robert Englund versus Kane Hodder. And when it came to Freddy versus Jason, Kane Hodder was sadly replaced. But Ken Kirzinger did a really good job in that film, to be honest. But the kills here, because if you're watching the Friday the 13th film, chances are you're here to see how people get murdered. Now, JJ, as mentioned, gets beaten with her own guitar. You've got Tamara, who is grabbed through a wall, thrown into a bathroom mirror, then stabbed with a shard of glass from that mirror. And she just kind of sits there on the floor going, no, 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 for like a minute or more. It's like you could kind of, try and fight back or just run away a little bit. Then we've got the storm that the boat encounters, because of course it does, and that plays into the subplot of the dad and son following in the footsteps of being an able sea captain. There's a dialogue here, like when Julius proclaims that school is out as he refuses to listen to his teacher Charles, when things really start to hit the fan. And when we do eventually get to New York, we're down to just 5 survivors. And Renee's dog, Ace. Yes, good boy, good dog. And those survivors immediately get mugged because and Renee's injected with a drug, which actually then she's rescued by Jason, which is okay. Then there's the whole baby Jason visions from Renee. They carry on throughout the movie, which are just a bit odd and are kind of supposed to tie her in some way to Jason because of their united fear of water. And then there's also the sewers flooding with toxic waste in the finale, which turns Jason into a child. That is something that happens. Now, is Jason Takes Manhattan a good movie? No. Is it a bad movie? Yeah, kind of. I'll give you that. But is it a fun, daft movie that can be enjoyed as a light-hearted popcorn slasher? Absolutely it is. And also you've got the glistening, watery version of Jason that finally gets to roam the streets of New York. That's a totally badass look for Jason. One of his better looks, I would say, out of the whole movies that we've seen so far. In fact, Jason Takes Manhattan could well be Kane Hodder's finest performance as Jason. Yes, he was in Part 7 in New Blood, and then Jason Takes Manhattan, and Jason Goes to Hell, and Jason X. But for me, I don't know. I think there's something here where Kane Hodder brings a brilliant aggression. I mean, he does in all of his Jason performances, but it just seems particularly so in Jason Takes Manhattan. There's kind of a sharpness. There's almost a quickness without actually being quick. Like there's a moment when he grabs a cop in New York, and just the speed of movement and the aggression with it. It's great. It's brilliant to see. So yeah, I mean. There is obviously, of course, way too little of Jason in New York because it's in the title, Jason Takes Manhattan. But again, Jason takes a little bit of Manhattan eventually in the final 25 minutes. But when you do see Jason in New York, it's still a bunch of fun. I mean, when you see him on the subway, it's just a cool visual. When you see him rocking up at Times Square, it's, they're fun moments. When he kicks the boombox over just because, and then the gangbangers who have the boombox, he turns around and just, when they go to kick off and fight, he just pulls his mask up and that scares them off, which is also a very cool little visual. And those kills, as mentioned, there's some great ones in here. Julius, of course, steals the show because it's brilliant and it's hilarious and it's awful all at the same time. Uncle Charles, when he finally bites the bullet, he's dumped in toxic waste and kind of melted. That's a fun one. I always find the JJ one fun, even though you don't particularly see much. I don't know, maybe it's the leather and Flying V. I like Flying Vs. And this Ken Kirzinger and Kane Hodder getting to go briefly face to face when Jason enters the diner where Ken Kirzinger's cook is working. Doesn't go well for Ken Kirzinger this time out, but as mentioned, he would return and take the Jason role in Freddy vs. Jason. So yeah, let us know what you think of Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. I cannot say it is not a bad movie, but I'm here pleading my case, defending it somewhat. So let us know what you think about that film. Let us know in the comments which other bad movies you would like to see featured here, whether that's just to explore how bad they really are, or whether that's to maybe put a defense for why they're not really as bad as you might have remembered them. But in the meantime, I've been Andrew Pollard from What Culture Horror. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Hopefully this will become a running series, and I'll catch you down the line.